On today's episode, we're going to be installing the Quaife Quick Ratio Steering Rack from NSX Rack Repair. These guys are really great, awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. First thing you're going to need to do is obviously lift the car. I'm using an alignment lift here. You're going to take off the wheels first, that makes life easy, and we're going to start from there going into the interior. Now, your interior will probably be more put together than mine is. However, this is just the state of the car when I did this. We're going to mark the steering column on the splines so we know where to put it back, loosen the top 6mm bolt, and take out the bottom 6mm bolt. And that's really all you need to do in the interior, so we're going to move on. Make sure to mark the bottom as well. I've already undid the battery terminal, so there's no electricity going. We're going to undo the battery tray here, just a couple of M10s, and it comes right out. Be careful so it doesn't knock you on your head. If you've ever done this on your own, you know a lot of people will just tell you, oh, you just need to take a hammer here and hit it, and it will loosen this and make it come out. Well, if you hit, even though this is a brass hammer, you hit this is aluminum, really, really soft, and it will damage it, and it will mess up this whole sleeve and the whole hub assembly, so don't do that. No hammers. Throw that away. If you don't have the Honda special tool here, and you don't want to go buy a special tool, you don't need to. What we can do is we can just undo it here at the tie rod, inner tie rod. It's just as effective. And especially if you just replace these and the boots are really good, you probably should do it this way. And here we go with loosening the inner tie rod. I went ahead and marked it as if I was going to be putting it right back in its spot using tape so that the lock nut couldn't move. This would help me get back to where it would normally be had I been able to put the rack back in. These bolts are pretty important. Those through bolts, we're going to need to hold on to those as we take out the rack from the other side. Should be M10 hardware all through, and then a couple of 14mm hex and 17mm hex is all it's going to take to remove these. And since we've already removed the steering column, it should be able to come out pretty easily right after that. No worries, I've loosened everything, but haven't quite gotten it out. Now that on the other side, I took out all the hardware. Now all that's left is to pull it out of the car, and we've done that. So now it's out of the car, and we don't really need to do this step, which is removing the inner tie rods. However, it does really make the steering rack a lot smaller, and that helps with the shipping costs. You want to reuse both the springs and this clip. I just used a hammer and a small flathead screwdriver. You can use whatever tools you want, or you can purchase new. Go ahead and use a small crescent wrench, undo the inner tie rod, and that makes everything so much smaller and easier to package. I had a customer EPS rack that was going to get rebuilt at the same time, so I decided to package these both together while doing that. So after getting back from NSX Rack Repair, they were shipped really well. I used the expanding foam, and they just reused the packaging. So both racks came back in great shape. I have new inner tie rods, outer tie rods, and bellows for the EPS rack, since the customer was really not wanting to touch anything in the steering for a good while. I'm going to assemble the EPS rack, since the manual rack is just considerably easier. It's just how it came back. You can see these 3D printed pieces that NSX Rack remakes, since they usually break from age and use. Now, a lot of people will reuse the washers, and I really don't like that, since it is a safety issue with the steering. So here I used brand new lock washer, bent it against the flats, and then just made sure everything was really good. Obviously, follow the service manual for torque specs and everything else. Nice new bellows for this EPS rack, because the ones that the customer had were torn. I went ahead and also put new clamps on using a hammer and either a flathead screwdriver, or in this case a punch. I'll kind of gently roll the tabs over, finishing with a punch just to make sure it's extra secure. Nice close-up view of the same thing here on both sides. And you're going to do this the same on both sides. Put the lock nut on now, and we're ready to place it onto the subframe with the bracket. After the bracket goes on, put the rubber bushing on and the bracket that holds that all together. I've lined up all the bolts, put them in the subframe where they belong, and it's time to put it in the car. As I'm lifting into the car, I'm looking for these alignment dowels and to really push the front subframe in, get it aligned well, and flush to the car before I start ratcheting down all of the hardware. I don't like pulling things in with the bolts. I think it's a really bad way to go. Make sure you torque everything to spec, and now that we've mounted everything to the car, it's time to do some wiring. Pull the wiring in from the engine bay and use the 6mm nuts to attach the electrics to the EPS so that you actually, well, it can work. Bend up the tabs with a punch. Be careful not to break the plastic pieces. It's very delicate, especially if you are reusing the old plastics. But make sure you put the rubber covers on and the clamps, the spiral clamps on. The ground wire actually goes on the outside of this cover, and you tighten down the two 6mm bolts to factory spec, and we're ready to, well, really put everything back together as it was. You can see I'm tightening everything down to spec here. Now, the washer you're seeing here is important for the engine ground. I don't know why, but Honda has it in that order, so I always put it back in that order. Reclip all of the electrics so it stays out of the way. Battery tray goes up. Now, this car was an NA2, so the battery tray is different than the one that you saw on the removal process from my NA1. I'm torquing it all down to spec after I've run the bolts down with an electric impact. Tighten the outer tie rods. Make sure you do not reuse a cotter pin. Use a new one every time. I've come to switch to the renewable cotter pins because I really seem to like them more. I measured this and made sure it was about the same or really close to what it was supposed to be. Alignment on the splines, and tighten that all back up and put the interior back together. And that is the rack install. Thanks for watching this video. See you next time.